Now, I remember returning after many years away to the Scottish city in which I'd grown up. It had been almost 15 years, and although the city had physically changed a great deal, sadly, the attitudes of many living there remained unaltered. I'd been living in London, Brighton, briefly, all too briefly in San Francisco, and even more briefly in Spain. But through a series of events, unfortunate or otherwise, I had found myself back in bonny Scotland, at my parents' home on the bank of the River Tay. Now, as you can imagine, in those 15 years, I'd been through the usual life-altering experiences, relationships, jobs, travel, and at least one immensely overwhelming tragedy, of which no doubt you'll hear of later. And for some reason I decided to visit a bar, the bar that I'd gone to in my underage youth. There I was welcomed by Fat Bob, translated as Fat Bob, whose opening line was, "You've really put on the beef," by which Fat Bob meant I was perhaps a little more beefy, blimpy, bovine, bulging, bulky, burly, chunky dumpy, elephantine, gargantuan, heavy, lardy, or more meaty than he recalled. I did remind him that the last time we met was prior to my 17th birthday, and that cream cakes and cheesy bakes can be very cruel. You see, I transformed from skinny vegan to slightly less slimline vegetarian. I wouldn't have said I was fat, and who cares if I was? A few days later, perhaps even the same day, it was in that same bar I ran into someone else from my teenage years. Back then we had mutual friends, one in particular. So I sat down with him and his gaggle of giggly girlfriends, and we spoke about our mutual friend, amongst other things, and it soon became quite apparent that we had very different views on a number of issues. The subject changed, however, and against my better judgment, I accepted a drink. Trapped, and perhaps he felt the same way, we talked about how our lives had been in the years since we'd last met, and as we chatted, I could sense his unease, and I shared my stories of selected highlights from my seemingly strange and disjointed life, to which he reacted with judgment, jealousy, and with a raised eyebrow, he disparagingly declared, "You've changed." To which, all I could retort was, "And you haven't." Now, please don't think that I was intentionally cruel, but if I'm being honest, I did feel justified and even empowered by this mild statement of self-recognition. I would go so far as to say that this was maybe a moment of epiphany, from which I've never looked back. In this brief but meaningful interaction, I realised that yes, I had changed. I was no longer meek and mild or afraid to express an opinion, but more confident, worldly, and yes, opinionated, but at the core I was still the same 17-year-old who knew right from wrong, who could instinctively detect insincerity. And the really remarkable aspect of this revelation was that I actually liked myself. The point of this story is to illustrate to you that the opinions of others are just that, opinions. And that the labels that were attached to me as a teenager may or may not have been correct at that time. In believing these labels to be a true definition of myself, I acted in ways which encouraged others to similarly define me. But somehow, with time and experience, I redefined myself. Okay, so my reaction to these past acquaintances sent a clear, perhaps blunt, message that I was not who they perceived me to be. I may have changed, whether this meant physically having more flesh on the bone, or growing a backbone, but what would be the point in living if the journey didn't involve change? The great news is, although we can't undo the past, we can, however, create a future that we desire through living a life that is truly authentic. The first step towards, I believe, towards true happiness and achieving your full potential is to acknowledge both who you are and what it is that you want to accomplish. Dr. Wayne Dyer encourages us to look inward, not outward, each and every day. This may sound simple, but when was the last time you truly took time to look at yourself and to evaluate if your goals and your behaviours are in line with your authentic self? Now, the greatest inspirational figure to me has to be Harvey Milk. Harvey was a pioneer, he was a visionary, he was tenacious, a tireless, determined social advocate. But, he was also a man who only found his calling when he found himself. His journey towards self-efficacy is what makes Harvey interesting. And to know that he struggled before finding his authentic core demystifies him as a man. And it gives hope to us all that somehow, in some way, we all might be capable of great things. So my message to you is live authentically, never give up hope, and like Harvey Milk would say if he were here, you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. Never give up hope, and never, ever blend in.